The Sun and the Star is one of the most recent Riordanverse books we have. I'd also say it's one of the most unique ones because this time, Rick isn't alone in writing this book, and instead, he's joined by another author named Mark Oshiro. In this video, I'll review and give my thoughts on this book. Since this is a fairly recent Riordanverse book, I'll have to give a major spoiler warning because this book touches on many moments from the previous series. So with that said, let's get started. I'm gonna be very honest and say that I was a bit underwhelmed with this book. I mean, I don't hate it, but it took me almost forever to finish reading it because of some reasons that I'll get into later. Anyway though, I still have mixed opinions on this book, so I can't really give it a proper rating as of the moment. Instead, I'll be breaking this video into two sides: the things I liked and the things I didn't really like. So let's go to the things I liked. So, the main premise of this book is that it's going to be a Solangelo adventure to deepen Nico and Will's relationship after being thrown in the backseat for almost all the time in the trials of Apollo. I like this idea because I love Nico and Will together, and I have to say that I like the first few chapters of The Sun and the Star. It showed how much Nico's nightmares affected him, and they were great moments that referenced the previous books. Reading those dreams was really cool, and I love how they were written. It almost felt like reading a horror book with how disturbing some moments were, and it was something that I've never really read in the Rick Riordan book. I think these scenes of Nico's dreams were Mark's doing, because it feels a bit different from what Rick would usually write. I like it though, and other parts I liked were the Solangelo moments of this book. After being in the background for 5 books in the Trials of Apollo, we finally got some Nico and Will moments. This is pretty much long overdue, and I love what we got. We get the revelation of how Nico came out to Will through a picnic party, and it was pretty hilarious to read about. We even get how they had their first kiss, and it was a moment I've been waiting for ever since the Hidden Oracle. It's so sweet to read moments like this, and it made reading the book worth it to me. I also like the talk Will had with Persephone because it opened Will's eyes more to the underworld and his relationship with Nico. This theme of light and darkness being inside of everyone is a nice detail I didn't expect from this book, and I think it's pretty cute because it goes well with how Nico and Will are. Generally, people think that Will is the light side while Nico is the dark side given their differences, but deep down, they're pretty much a mix of both. Unfortunately, that's where all the good side ends for me. Let's go to the things that I didn't really like. I guess the most prominent thing that I had to say is how Rick and Mark handled the writing department because it feels really unbalanced. Rick once mentioned that he and Mark wrote this book in a 50-50 kind of division, but I feel like it isn't as balanced as he mentioned. I don't know if it's because I've read almost all of Rick Riordan's books to recognize Rick's writing style, but whenever I read The Sun and the Star, I actually recognized which were written by Rick and which were Mark's doing. Like, it's pretty obvious to me, and they didn't blend well together. Another annoying part I found about this book was how many pop culture references there were. I mean, generally, Rick does sprinkle a little bit of this around his books, but it was minimal and actually funny at times to me, but it was too much in The Sun and the Star. Plus, I don't think it makes that much sense that Nico would vibe with these jokes because he's from a different time period and he won't be able to get the references. Like, I had to give a shout out to that one time Nico joked about Lil Nas X, and for some reason, Will didn't understand it, but Nico, who's from the 1930s, was able to get it. Like, I just don't think that's realistic. It just comes off as pretty weird. Another thing I was pretty disappointed by was how they handled Will's character. I mean, I think I sort of understand. We barely know who Will is from the previous books, and it's nice to see more background on Will's past. However, I think they made Will a bit too cheesy. Rick and Mark focus more on Will being the sunshine guy of their relationship, but I think they made him more of a comic relief character and a punching bag of the plot. Like, let me explain, and listen, I love Will in the books despite only seeing him once in a while. I've mentioned that in my tier ranking videos all the time. He's a great guy, and it pains me to see him in this book as an incompetent and almost stupid person. 90% of the book is about Nico saving Will from some monster because Will is constantly incompetent. Like, you're telling me that after everything Nico, Percy, and Annabeth talks about Tartarus, Will would decide to not bring any weapons even if they're going to that said hell? All the things he brings along the way are just cheesy things for his character, like a nightlight or something random. I mean, I sort of understand that Will needs sunlight because his father is the god of the sun and it affects him, but I found it annoying to see Nico drag Will constantly throughout the book. I wish that Will still had enough energy to show that he's not just the background character or medic we see, but instead, we could focus more on Will's other character strengths like resiliency, leadership, and resourcefulness, all the things he exhibited as the head counselor of the Apollo cabin. Will doesn't really show this, and instead, he just gets himself in trouble all the time. I also find it stupid that Will seems clueless about the underworld or Tartarus, even if he's been with Nico for about a year now. Like, doesn't Nico talk to Will about any of this? Will's supposed to understand all of this better because he supports Nico throughout Nico's nightmares and trauma, so why does he seem so clueless about everything? I just find it really weird, and don't get me started on their relationship issues. One of the main issues they both have is that Will thinks that the underworld is dark and creepy because it was related to death, and it hurts Nico. I don't know if I'm going against the popular opinion here, but to me, that's such a petty reason because Will is a war medic. He witnesses death all the time on the battlefield, and we're talking about the same guy who was brave enough to go to the Battle of Manhattan and witness his half-brother's death. Will became head counselor because of his brothers dying in battle, and you're telling me that he isn't used to death and thinks the underworld is creepy because it's related to death? Like, I don't know, that doesn't really add up to me. Another part of the book that I noticed a lot was the random humor in it. I already mentioned the pop culture references throughout the book being a bit weird, but the humor just felt flat and not that funny. It lacked the sassy and genuinely hilarious ones we got from PJO or Magnus Chase, and instead is just forced and a bit weird. Like, whenever something serious happens, they somehow manage to make it into a joke, and I think it's pretty off because they're in Tartarus, like in hell. I mean, Rick does lighten up the mood once in a while in a dark adventure, but it's just not the same here. I wish they made the tone a bit more serious to higher up the stakes more, and to make the plot a bit more interesting. Speaking of the plot, meeting Bob again was nice, but the scene that came after this was Nyx's arrival. Nyx as a villain was something that I was skeptical of, because I thought that Nyx might be too powerful to go up against. In Greek mythology, Nyx was a primordial goddess, and is older than the gods themselves, so for Nico and Will to win against her is pretty unrealistic to me. However, they do win against her because of the power of the plot, really. Before getting into that though, the most infamous thing that comes out of this book was what Nyx did to Nico. I don't even know how to explain it, but essentially, Nico harbored so many negative emotions to the point that Nyx turned them into these Kako demons. I already mentioned this in the Solangelo timeline that I had no idea how to react to this information, and until now, I still can't wrap my mind around this concept. Does Nico now have children or pets? I don't even know, and at first, I actually find it a bit poetic to make this as the equal value, as Nico does need to let go of these bad emotions in his life. However, like most of the book, it's pretty cheesy, and it's quite an underwhelming thing after hyping up the equal value line for so long. Like, I wish they would have been better with higher stakes, and I'm still trying to accept the Kako demons. And at this point, I'll be answering the question, was this book worth reading? From my experience, it was alright. I really tried to love this book. I usually give books about 100 pages to see if I like them or not before putting them away, but I pushed through pages to finish reading this book. I had so much high hopes to see more of Will, to finally know his character and his relationship with Nico. Though the book managed to give me some sweet moments, there's ultimately more bad than good that I saw in it. There were too many inconsistencies, like how Nico accidentally called Bianca his mother instead of his sister, and how he reached out to Piper McLean randomly by the end of the book. I don't remember any book wherein they talked and bonded, and I just don't get how Nico chose to speak to her over Hazel, his sister. Speaking of Hazel, I'm so sad that Nico sounds so distant about her in this book. It was as if all the bonding they've had in the Heroes of Olympus just vanished, and she was just another person to him instead of a sister. Going back to Nico's talk with Piper though, it was pretty forced even if I did like the small talk they have about sexualities and learn to accept yourself. It was a nice touch if it didn't feel so random and forced like the Kako Demons plotline. Overall, this book had some nice moments, but it was brought down by so much irrelevant and mediocre moments that didn't add up to the previous books. I really wish I ended up loving this book a lot, and I'm sad that it's probably one of my least favorite Rick Riordan books right now. So, how about you? What are your thoughts on The Sun and the Star? Let me know in the comments down below.